So even a cursory glance at my channel name and my current videos will show you that I love Legend of Zelda. I love playing as Link, leaving a small town with a cheap sword, on a quest to save the world, becoming more powerful and experienced along the way. I also, however, love experiencing these kind of stories with my own characters, through the wonders of Dungeons and Dragons. Link really is the archetypal D&D hero. I mean, he explores dungeons, he kills dragons, and he gets lots of loot. But if we were to actually play as Link in Dungeons and Dragons, how would we do it? Which class would he be? Well, that thought led me to create this video, in which we're going to take 5 characters from the Legend of Zelda series and try to figure out which D&D classes best fits them. This video will definitely be most enjoyed by people who are familiar with both Dungeons & Dragons and Legend of Zelda. However, I'll try to explain things well enough that even if you don't really play D&D, you can still follow along. This video mainly focuses on the characters' classes and subclasses, a subclass being like a specialization of your chosen class. We are avoiding race because a lot of D&D races are a little too specific to the fictional universes of D&D to apply to Legend of Zelda. We're also going off the 5th edition of the game as it is the one I'm most familiar with. With that out of the way, let's get to our first character. Number 1. Ghirahim. Ghirahim is one of my all-time favorite characters in Legend of Zelda, and funnily enough, he also represents my favorite class in current Dungeons & Dragons. Ghirahim is obviously a warlock. More specifically, he's a Pact of the Blade warlock with a fiend as his patron. So in Dungeons & Dragons, a warlock is a character who's not innately magical like a sorcerer, nor have they mastered the use of magic through study like a wizard. Instead, they're granted their power through a relationship with some sort of powerful being known as their patron, often a notorious demon, a powerful fairy, or a demigod. This power is usually granted to the person with the knowledge that it can be revoked at any time, and often with further consequences. This means that the warlock is usually in a subservient role to the patron. Doesn't this sound exactly like the relationship between Ghirahim and Demise? Ghirahim is quite literally Demise's weapon. His powers are almost certainly granted to him from his master, and just like the D&D warlock, Demise chooses when to take his powers back. A pact is a certain set of magical powers that are granted to the warlock from his patron, and the Pact of the Blade is significant for Ghirahim because it grants him the ability to materialize a weapon from thin air, which we see him do many times. Also, access to Eldritch Blast and other magic spells would cover near all of the magic projectile attacks that we see him using in-game, and that pretty much covers it. Ghirahim's a very unique character, and Warlock is a very unique class. I think it's very cool that the two of them are so alike. Number 2. Bosa.
It was written that Calamity Ganon once adopted the form of a Gerudo. And that will make this victory all the more satisfying. I like that. Now I can take this personally.
Lady Urbosa was the champion of the Gerudo people in Breath of the Wild, and a complete badass. We get to see her put on a display of her skills, and we even get to harness her powerful elemental ability, Urbosa's Fury. Access to this is also why we're able to make such an easy decision on her D&D class, and confidently say that Lady Urbosa is a monk, following the way of the elements. I know that this might be a little bit contentious to those of you who are familiar with the monk class, as there isn't really any proof that Urbosa harnesses her ki or that she trained at a monastery, which are both pretty essential to being a monk. My pick for this isn't so much based on Urbosa's spirituality, but on her fighting style, which most certainly strongly resembles martial arts. The way that Urbosa fights is well developed and rigorous, and it's even described as a beautiful dance, which is something that can be used to describe the katas that are being pulled off by martial arts masters. And as the monk is the only real 5th edition class with a focus on martial arts, it makes sense to pick it even with her lack of spirituality. She clearly shows the discipline and drive that's needed to be a monk, so a monk is what we'll go with. Some people not so familiar with D&D may be wondering how she can be a monk if she fights with a sword and a shield, as obviously monks are all about martial arts. Well, there are plenty of weapons-based martial arts in real life, and monks have a separate subclass dedicated to mastery of the weapon arts and hand-to-hand. But Urbosa is neither. She would fight with the Way of the Elements. A monk that fights with the Way of the Elements imbues her fighting style with elemental magic, and is allowed to pick an elemental discipline, which is essentially a technique that fuses her fighting style with elemental attacks, allowing them to access spells such as Shatter or Thunder Wave, which could easily replicate Urbosa's Fury, allowing her to cause lightning damage to enemies at the snap of a finger. Number 3. Lana. I am aware that Lana is not a canon character, but she's perfect and needs to be protected at all costs, so oh well. This one's a bit tricky because her fighting style and powers change so drastically with every different weapon. However, one subclass of wizard covers her spellbook and summoning gate weapons, and that's the School of Conjuration, which the 5th edition handbook describes as focusing on spells that produce objects and creatures out of thin air. That sounds like would pretty much cover both Lana's magic blocks and summoning portal. Obviously, Lana is referred to as a sorcerer in-game, but in Dungeons & Dragons, sorcerers are something kind of special. They are people that are born with magic inside them inherently, kind of like the wizards in Harry Potter versus the muggles. So, to me, it seems that since she does carry around a spellbook, it is far more likely that in D&D terms, she's a wizard. The last point is her spear, pun intended, which allows her to manipulate nature. This leads me to believe that she has a few levels in Druid as well, although since it is a minority of her actual power, I'm led to believe that it really is just a level or two. So there you have it. Lana is a conjuration wizard who's learning a little Druid on the side. Also, she's the best girl in Legend of Zelda, and if you disagree, you're just wrong. Number 4. Nabooru. Next up, we have another Gerudo, this one being Nabooru from Ocarina of Time. This one's pretty easy as well because we see Nabooru in action twice in 2 very different scenarios. Nabooru is obviously a multi-classed fighter rogue. More specifically, she's a fighter champion and a rogue thief. Out of all the entries in this video, I actually think this one needs the least amount of justification. In terms of being a thief, we meet Nabooru sneaking around the Spirit Temple, and she's even blatantly referred to as a lone wolf thief by a gossip stone. Case pretty much closed. Her being a fighter champion comes from when we meet her again as an adult, and we find her flawlessly fighting while donning an iron knuckle suit. Those things are heavy, and in Dungeons & Dragons, only certain classes start off with the ability to proficiently wear heavy armor, a fighter being one of them. The champion subclass focuses heavily on being strong, resilient tanks that hit like trucks, which certainly seems to describe Nabooru in the Iron Knuckle. So yeah, Nabooru, Thief Champion, our first properly multi-classed character. Number 5. Breath of the Wild Link.
That cut doesn't look too bad, actually. You're fine for now. But you know, there's a fine line between courage and recklessness. As brave as you are, that does not make you immortal.
Last but not least, we have the hero himself, Link. More specifically, Link from Breath of the Wild. What character class would the newest incarnation of the hero be? You already know, it's so obvious to anyone. Link is obviously a swashbuckler rogue. Wait, what? You might be pretty confused by this choice, especially if you play D&D. It obviously should be either ranger or fighter, maybe a multi-class between them, shouldn't it be? Well, I don't think so, and I'd like to take some time to argue why he wouldn't be a fighter and likely isn't a ranger, and then argue the case for swashbuckler. Let's start off with fighter. Link is really good at fighting, there's no question about that. With a trusty sword and shield, he looks ready to clash metal with the best of them, so obviously he's a fighter. But the problem with that is every martial class in D&D can be good at swinging the sword, and there are just no good fighter subclasses that apply to Breath of the Wild Link. He isn't a samurai, he can shoot elemental arrows like an arcane archer, but he buys them, he doesn't enchant them himself. He can fight a top Epona, but he doesn't have the same combat synergy that Cavalier has with his mount. He isn't a knight because he has no allies to buff with his leadership abilities. He doesn't have access to Eldritch powers, so Eldritch Knight is ruled out. That leaves us with the champion and the Battlemaster. Battlemaster is focused on performing really complex combat maneuvers. Link has a couple of these in Breath of the Wild, but his sword fighting isn't nearly complex enough to consider him a Battlemaster. And champion might seem appropriate, but the only way to make him tanky and hard-hitting in-game is through powerful weapons and armor, not through his own inherent ability. So since none of the subclasses really fit, I don't think we can consider Link a fighter. The case for Ranger is better, and I honestly wouldn't be opposed to the idea that he dropped a level or two into it. He certainly does seem to know his way around the wilderness. The problem is that in modern day D&D, that isn't really relegated to the Ranger class anymore. Anyone can become proficient in survival and be good at living off the land. Much like Fighter, none of the subclasses of Ranger seem to really apply to Link, seeing as a lot of the tracking is done with the Sheikah Slate instead of Link's own abilities. So at the absolute most, I'd say he's a level or two in Ranger, but I don't really think that he has to have any. So he isn't a fighter, and he isn't a ranger. I argue that he's a rogue, particularly the swashbuckler subclass, and I think I have a strong case to make. The idea of a rogue might bring to mind the idea of someone sneaking around, staying hidden from sight, and striking from the shadows to bring people down with a single blow. And I mean, does that sound wrong? The rogue class is built around the idea of the sneak attack. This ability is slightly misnamed because in practice the ability grants you extra damage whenever the character is at an advantage, not just when you're hidden. This can obviously come from traditional things like stealth attacks. This doesn't sound too far away from Link in Breath of the Wild at all. One of the best ways to go about taking a camp of enemies out is to sneak up to them and take the enemies out one by one. But the swashbuckling subclass is what really cemented this for me. The essence of a swashbuckler is kind of hard to describe, so instead, I'm just gonna risk getting flagged for a dozen different copyright strikes and just show you what a swashbuckler is.
Jonesy! Hi, Mac! decided you are better than I am.
Then why are you smiling?
Because I know something you don't know.
And what is that?
I am not left-handed. It's not for a traitor. You die by the knife.
Does that not explain Breath of the Wild Link in a nutshell? Sneaking into a Yiga clan base, trying to distract the guards with bananas, getting caught, fleeing up a nearby banister, parachuting across the room, and dropping into a sword plunge is something straight out of a swashbuckling action movie, not a stoic Lord of the Rings battle scene. Trying to classify Link into a character class is tricky because of the fact that you can really play him however you want. Maybe you really do play him as a fighter, heavily armored and always walking forward. Or maybe you play him as a rogue, but as an assassin, never really leaving the shadows. But I think the spirit of Breath of the Wild's chemistry set design leads itself to playing him as a swashbuckler, and I hope I made, at the very least, an entertaining argument as to why I think that to be the case. Thanks so much for watching this video. It's something a little bit new for the channel, quite a bit different from my Hyrule history videos. Let me know what you thought about my picks, and don't be afraid to disagree. I'd love to hear your interpretations of the characters as well. And if you liked the video, let me know. I'd love to do another one. Which characters would you like to see me do next? Thanks for tuning in, and keep safe out there. Hyrule's a dangerous place to go alone.